Hey, Chris. Welcome, everyone. This class is going to be an experiential class to walk through the codes of codependency. We're still landing on what we're calling it, aren't we, Chris? We're still like the flower of life, the Merkaba of contemplation. It's still gestating in its name, but this kind of beautiful combination of the yin and the yang coming together. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Sarah Shepard. We'll link our bios in the email for everybody, and there'll be more information. This is my dear friend, Chris. Do you want to introduce yourself briefly? Hi.
Hey, hi everybody. Yeah, I'm Chris Durkees. I'm excited for today.
Yeah, we're going to start with just a little bit of an attunement to kind of land in our bodies, and then we're going to go through the points of this program, this course, which is a multiple workshop online retreat is one way of discussing it. It's a multiple class course. It's an opportunity to really experience transformation and transformational alchemy. We're in the ring of alchemy in the gene keys right now, so we're in this kind of perfect portal for practicing alchemical transformation. And today we really just want to make it simple and accessible for everybody to really get a sense of how it's already occurring in your life and how you can really bring some awareness and some felt sense to what can be achieved with this, what can be achieved with this beautiful practice of contemplation and the art of contemplation. Did you want to add anything to that, or I'll jump into our little attunement?
No, I
All
think
right.
thank you. Let's go for the attunement.
Okay. So close your eyes to begin and just come towards your inward gaze. Let your hands land however they land in your body. And just by listening to my voice, I'm going to invite you actually to follow my guidance through a building of your spine and the structure of your spine, landing in the pelvis so that you can experience the seat of the pelvis, those sits bones, really grounding down beneath you. And imagine the crown of your head lengthening up towards the ceiling. Back of the head rises a little bit more, so the chin tucks slightly. And then your sternum sort of floats up ever so slightly so the shoulders can drop back and down. The belly button pulls in towards the spine to create a cinching. This internal felt sense of your own inner container, your own container of a strong spine and a soft heart. And then on your next breath, I want you to really just collapse into what would feel like a slouch or like a dropping into yourself. So exaggerating that movement so that your rib cage folds down, the head can turn downwards, the pelvis can actually tip forward so that the lumbar spine curves, and your head can either lean to one side or another, but really magnifying and exaggerating that experience of dropping into self as if your whole body was heavier than you've experienced it for a long time, this heavy sense of oppression, weightiness, really just taking that shape of resignation and sinking in and allowing that to be the gesture that your body's communicating to the world and to yourself. And then coming back into building from that root space, that pelvis, pressing the pelvis in, grow the spine back up, lengthening through the lumbar spine as the belly comes forward, the heart comes forward, the shoulders roll back, the chest opens, the collarbones blossom slightly, and ever so slightly lengthening the back of the crown of the head so that as you reach up, you're lengthening through the whole four sides of the neck. As if all of the skin of your body could reach upward and simultaneously move in four directions. Belly pulls into the spine. Bring the chest forward even more, the shoulders back even more, and lengthen the spine as if you're in a very militant posture for a drill sergeant. And then On your exhale, letting that go, come down again all the way into that complete submission, that whirling around yourself. And so much so that you can really feel the weight of your body hanging off of your spine. Even if it's a little bit painful, even if it feels uncomfortable, like you can't breathe, or you're draping in such a way that it strains some of the tissues for just a moment. Really come into that felt sense of the discomfort, of the compression, of the collapse. And then we're going to grow ourselves up towards that experience of our containment again. Pelvis presses down, belly moves forward, heart moves forward, crown of the head raises up. And then just back off from the militant expression, just about 5 or 10%, so that you can still feel yourself resourced within, not moving too far into the strictness of your body, but really engaged still, not collapsing, but in a glowing essence of holding yourself within that bridge space between the two, not too much and not too little. Imagine taking a inner photograph of what this feels like and sensing into what it feels like to be able to experience both the lightness of the inner world as well as the structure of the containment that you've created by truly showing up in the sense of your body and building this yourself. And then on your next breath, you can open your eyes, keep your gaze cast down, and when you're ready, come on back. And land in this moment. That felt good.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Glowing
So,
essence. Glowing essence. That was really nice. I really felt that one.
it's so neat. Some words just land in this way that it's like, uh-huh, okay, that's, and everybody has like a little bit of a different one. So, yeah, glowing essence, sort of the liquid light, the liquid love. Yeah. So, alchemy.
Hmm.
Should we just jump into the slide, or do you want to talk a little bit about alchemy first?
I think let's bring up this slide.
Hmm.
It's a good idea.
Work off the workshop.
Hmm. So, alchemy is a traditional practice, which is usually assumed, the kind of 101 or cheesy version is that it was trying to make gold out of lead kind of thing. And there were such attempts and experiments. Um, and in fact, the word chemistry, our word chemistry, comes from the word alchemy. So you can see the CHEM there.
Mm.
In chemistry is al is Arabic for the, so the chemistry literally would be a translation of alchemical. Um, and the original scientists that we now think of as kind of the beginning forms of scientists were alchemists. There wasn't a distinction between what we now think of as science, which is seen as secular, versus alchemy, which is considered woo or some kind of spiritual thing or whatever. But for our purposes, the main point of alchemy is that it was not just understood to be an external process of transformation, but also an internal one. And there was said to be a correspondence between the two. And so, imagery of alchemy that has all these kind of chemistry based or science labby kinds of proto science labby kinds of metaphors and imagery are all coded language or symbols. They're analogies or allegories for an inner form of chemistry, if you like, an inner form of transformation. So the lead, for example, will refer to potentially our survivalistic energies or aspects of ourself that are in that collapse state or the militant state that you had us move through there a few moments ago. And the gold is something more of the glowing essence and how we can take some raw states, whether they're emotional states, mental states, physical, sensory states, or some combination of them, energetic states, and how they can move from a lead form, if you like, to a gold form. How they can move from a stuck, maybe suffering, heavy, oppressive dynamic, as you named, to one that has a flow associated with it that is reconnected to life force and vitality. And the process we're going to look at here and go through today with the beautiful image and the 6 points has a lot to do with how to set up the experiment, if you like, how to set up the alchemy or the chemistry internally in a way that's safe and that leads to strong probabilities of success. That the lead or leadened quote unquote types of our experience can transmute into gold.
I uh I really love, I've done this my whole life, kind of looking at the body as a laboratory. And so I just think you just pulled that together so beautifully, and sort of these elements that you're speaking about. One of the things that has come through with this contemplation time that I'm in with the 47th gene key being part of this ring of alchemy is that there's so first of all, in every gene key, in the shadow patterns, or we'll say the shadow patterns are these unconscious patterns that we've inherited that are a part of our survival nervous system. And they're wise and they've gotten us this far. And they have an unconscious element to them where they can be overly reactive, so overly militant or overly yang in their expression when there's a defense response happening in the nervous system or a sense of unsafeness happening in the nervous system, which can happen when big feelings come up or big triggers come up in life where that experience of like I don't feel like I feel like I'm being emotionally attacked, or I feel like I'm losing connection with something that is really meaningful to me. And so there can be this either yang expression in the nervous system or this yin expression of avoidance in the nervous system, which is to not want to look at the information that's coming in, or to not be able to really feel myself because I'm so much in a collapse that I can't feel the flow that's happening. And so they're beautiful kind of guardrails of the this survival nervous system, which is a really brilliant nervous system. But right in the middle of them is the gold, and in the alchemical process, the the lead, the expression that is being boiled down, the gold is within that. The gold is the response to it. The gold is already being revealed. And Chris and I have been riffing on this piece for a long time, that so often in working with people around this intelligence of the feeling body and what the feeling body is longing to reveal for us, what can happen is this over yang or over yin in one direction or another that was part of our conditioning. And yet we get to kind of turn towards within this is the gold. Within this is this response to it. So yeah, I'm really excited to kind of look at it this way because I've been practicing, contemplation and meditation and um all kinds of deep, flowy women feeling circles for a long time, but I was never really getting to the juicy gold
Mhm.
transformation parts until I was able to find the yang structure to hold my yin flow. So that's why we've got it built this way, and that's what we're going to offer today with this. And then the last part that I wanted to include is that the course is intentionally set up to be a lot of practice of it, because just like any kind of practice, the more we rebuild this pattern and feel it in our body, the more we come to know that it's there. And so we're already whole. We're already coming from a space of perfection and completeness. And we can forget that at times. We can forget that in our patterning. And so we get to just help you reveal the gold that's already there.
Hmm. And I appreciate you named we'll go into it more, but just from a classic, the imagery of alchemy, there needs to be some kind of a crucible. Sometimes that's called a cauldron, sometimes it's a crucible, sometimes it's called the alembic. But essentially, if you think of like your Bunsen beaker, in chem lab and high school chemistry, you have some kind of glass container that can handle some heat. So the first thing we need is a container that's going to hold the liquid, and then a fire, which is going to be in this work, it's really going to be the fire is going to be awareness and love. It's going to be really deep love um, and presence. The crucible, the container needs to be strong enough to handle a little bit of heat. And into the crucible goes our memories, goes our patterning, goes our conditioning, goes our survivalistic adaptations and responses and its associated emotional conditioning and stories and all the things. That all kind of goes in the hopper. That all goes into the cauldron. And as you said, in the first phase of alchemy, what happens is it starts to un unbecome, starts to melt down. And that container that's holding the lead that's in the process of melting down has to be strong enough while there's this period while the old system is coming a bit undone and is slowly and gently unraveling and unwinding. And that's what holds capacity, and that's what holds coherency in the midst of some other stuff temporarily going out of its previous form or equilibrium. And then in the second phase of the alchemy, now that it's turned to kind of liquid or goo, and then the heat deepens a bit, inherent, as you said, inside of that is the potential for gold. And so there's this kind of moment between the first thing is kind of coming undone a bit or melting down. And then there's a bit of a moment or a gap. And then the reformulation, the rebirth that happens in a more pristine and thriving oriented dynamic. And that crucible is so important because it has to hold all the way through to the point that the new orientation and this more elegant form of the nervous system and of our energy body and feeling body can really start to take hold. And particularly on the yang side of what we've got here on the list as we'll go into, those are really key for the formation of the crucible or the container, whatever you want to call it.
This was the part that changed everything for me, was really becoming conscious of my own containment and really becoming conscious of my own ability to check in on my beaker. How's my beaker doing? Because the flame is here,
Right.
right? Which is going one way more than the other. So
Mm.
yeah. Yeah. So this ability to create the containment is a really beautiful opportunity to bring everything that's perceived as the outside world actually into the container and take responsibility for that which has triggered me on the outside. All the big bad they out
Mm.
there is actually part of my projection. It's actually part of me outsourcing the information. And if I take radical responsibility for it and I bring it all home into this beaker to work with, that's where the transformation can happen. But that pivot to turn towards in those moments where it's the ouch, 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 or the how dare you, or pretty much anything that involves like a pointing finger, right?
Mhm.
My life would be so great if my husband could just, or the government could just, or
Hmm.
all of these sort of ways that there's a beautiful missed opportunity to find out what truly wants to be revealed in that, if we're willing to build our own containment.
Yeah, so should we go into awareness initiation, number one? I think you're
Yeah.
segueing nicely there. So, I think a key part of this principle for me is that, as you're saying there, the distinction between what are things that might be triggers, as people call them, the things that trigger, versus what is our, and this also even points to number two, responsibility. So when a lot of us have places that are ouchy, it's particularly if they're rooted in childhood stuff. Not all of them are, but plenty of them are for plenty of people. And there can be ancestral stuff, and then there can be parts of the collective human journey that can all be in there. We're not to blame. This isn't to blame the individual for having those wounding spots. Often they may not well have, they may have been innocent in the fact that the wounding may be there, particularly if it's from young times. And yet, nevertheless, there needs to be an awareness that a situation might be activating a latent wound, which is not the same always as that situation is causing wounding. It might be, but in other cases, it more is that the situation is just actually inflaming something that was already there. And at that point, the awareness moves into recognizing the distinction between that level of what's happening in this moment, and this is a activator or a trigger, versus the fact that it's triggering something that was already there. And now it's maybe a little inflamed, but it didn't put it there necessarily. It may well have already been there. And therefore, the responsibility is going to come in is to say that even if one is not to blame for the wound having been there, we are in our adult selves responsible for the transmutation of our own experience. Number one, so that it doesn't continue to cause us suffering. And number two, so that it doesn't become a place that ends up unconsciously being a place where we cause hurt to self or to others. And that takes awareness. And that takes a recognition of this kind of like two-level effect. Like, what's the actual just thing that's happening that's, scratching and making the bug bite get itchy versus what's the actual bite and what's the actual allergic response in the system and how to work with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And agitation is here. I'm aware that there's information here. Sometimes we just wake up with it. Sometimes I just wake up in that chemistry where it's like, I'm just in a funk
Yeah,
and I don't know what's going on. And then the mind is like, ooh, let me build a story for you. And
right.
in this, we're saying, well, we could actually come into digestion around it in this process.
Yeah.
So the initiation is a turn towards. It is a opportunity to dive into the discomfort as if the discomfort has something valuable to offer. Should we have the courageous heart that is able to stay curious and work with it? The
As
one part,
I was to say, as a parent, I know that the my kids are amazing. Uh, they've got a radar for finding my my old stuff, my responses, and they'll poke them. And
only
it's
your kids do that. Nobody
only
else's
the,
kids
yeah,
do
that's and
that.
and and at that point I can either get into a like, stop that and make it about behavioral change, or I can say, you know, that all they did here was poke a spot that was already sore in me, and they didn't make it sore. It was already sore before. And the initiation is the willingness to say, now there's a cycle of transformation or alchemy to me to do. This is kind of also, I think, pointing to number two in terms of the responsibility. Yeah, it doesn't mean I'm to blame for why that sore spot may have been there in the first place, but it does mean as the adult in the situation, I'm not responsible to first be aware, to then be willing to undergo the initiation, and to take the responsibility to say, this is actually mine to deal with, and not how can I just fix an external situation to make it so that the thing doesn't get poked. Instead of just managing or coping with the symptoms, am I actually going to be willing in an initiatory way to undergo the deeper healing work to actually change the underlying cause so that it's not pokeable? And when I've done that, and imperfect parent that I am, but the moments where I have been poked a few times and I finally recognize and come into awareness that I'm getting poked and then deal with that. And it's a really fascinating experience to watch them like poke a time or two and not get any reaction out of me because the situation's now been neutralized or alchemized. And then it's like, oh, well, that's boring. And then they stop poking there. They'll find some other one and then go do that one. But there's a fun moment to watch where like the poke doesn't work because there's a more deep neutrality now in the system and equanimity, and then watch the response that occurs in that, whether that's kids, whether that's a partner, whether that's, family members, coworkers, wherever that dance is, whoever you're having that dance with.
Yeah, this movement towards sovereignty is like such a brilliant journey. One of the things that I've observed to my kind of chagrin so many times is how we mirror one another's kind of pokey spot. And without really intentionally being like, oh, I really want to agitate Chris with this pokey spot, I'll have something alive within me, which I'm not intending to do this, but it'll be a behavior or an arc that is seeking to be healed. And this is one thing that I found with the initiatory arc and sort of looking at trauma is like, well, trauma happened in my life. Some sort of big energy occurred at one point that was seeking to go through a whole process, and it didn't get to end its process. And so it's still residing within me, seeking for an end to the process, unconsciously going around poking people or being poked in order to come to a consolidation. And that's really what we're doing to each other in relationship. When these things spark up, it's these unresolved essences that are looking to be claimed and loved and brought to resolution. But they don't show up in this beautiful little suit that's like, excuse me, I'm seeking resolution. They show up in these patterns. And so we get to pull the pattern back in. Sometimes not even from our life. Sometimes they're even epigenetic and they've come from other members of our ancestral field. And so it's really beautiful, generous work, for our children, for the people in our lives, for ourselves to show up in this way and to come into that sovereign expression, knowing that it's parts that are seeking resolution.
And it's absolutely the case. I appreciate what you're saying there. And it's absolutely the case that there are some situations where something is getting poked in someone, they work through their piece around it, and they're actually still also like some problematic or unhelpful dynamics in some kind of relational sphere. And that may then teach us about boundaries, and the alchemy may then have us kind of stand up for ourselves. And as you had us doing in that process, like have our own back, you know? So it's not that saying that by approaching this model, it's not saying there aren't still ethics and right relationship and boundaries. In fact, those uh, get quite a bit stronger, particularly if they have folks who, and this like my own experience certainly was like overly empathic and taking too many hits on the chin and kind of swallowing my own feelings because that was like what would create peace or what would make others feel okay, and that was my kind of survivalistic adaptation. And so for me, a lot of this yang energy and creating a crucible is actually say yeah, I have my own emotional responses in this situation, and also maybe this behavior is just not actually okay. Like both things can be true. It doesn't have to be a one or the other.
Mhm.
Um, and I'll do my part, but I'm also gonna ask and request that like here's some stuff that I would prefer to be treated in the following ways. Please
Yeah.
respect that.
Yeah. 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 This is like, sometimes I'm kind of smiling because this is like, yes, this has been my growth area too, is boundaries. And this is the area that I didn't get a lot of in my upbringing and in my life. And so it's unrecognizable sometimes to me that I could have a boundary. It's not that I'm not
Mhm.
trying to. I don't even know what that means at times. And I don't even know where that would be relative to my need. A boundary is in support of a need. And if I don't know what my need is, or I can't find myself because I haven't got enough containment, I haven't got enough boundary, then those patterns can really play out for years. That's what a codependent dynamic is these patterns are playing off of each other in this sort of suffering that never gets to that resolution point because one of the two people in the dynamic is following the dynamic instead of following themselves. So the boundary allows us to come back into self and being really realistic about what I can show up with in my boundary is another, that agency to be honest with myself. It can take a little while. It can take years. It can take a lifetime to really come to a mastery around these things. So being able to sort of look at in the my own containment, what parts am I good at? And what parts are going to take me a little bit more time and focus? And can I give myself the permission to try that, maybe do it wrong, come back to self, integrate some pieces of what did work, and then also come back to like, all right, now, how do I re-inform the boundary with this space? And emotions are actually seeking. This is one of the kind of big pivots for me as well, is that emotions are seeking to show where there isn't a boundary, right? So anger being this beautiful one of like a boundary has been breached. That's the felt sense of anger. Shame is this opportunity to look at, I have a connection with other, and I have a longing to be in a relationship with other. And right now, that's under a renegotiation in this moment. So, what is the approval and acceptance that I'm seeking that shame is trying to show me? Shame is trying to show me where I need to make approval of myself and my own feelings within this. So the emotions are inviting this awareness. The emotions are always calling for this. And if there's such a strong emotive response that the containment can't hold it, then we spill. I like this expression, we spill or we flood. And often that shows up as like a fight or an avoidance pattern. And then the codependent dance goes on. So yeah. Should we talk a little bit about the survival nervous system and the ancient nervous system a bit?
Yeah, I think in light of since we've come nicely here to number three about safety and boundaries and wise action that so there's a nice to me kind of combination or complement in the sense that the radical responsibility is really like we're not necessarily responsible for things that are done unto us, but we're responsible for our responses to everything in our adult self. And where we don't have yet responsibility, right? We don't yet have the ability to respond consciously because the shadow pattern or the survivalistic pattern is still quite um, active. Then the awareness and the initiation is the choice to work on that. Again, not the symptom level, but the underlying cause. And then the safety and the boundaries and the wise action is saying, and if we're actually going to dig a layer deeper or two and work at root layers of some of these um, deeper hurts, or it can also just be parts of ourselves that got cut off because they weren't safe, like genuine parts of our being and our light that got uh, there's gold. There's gold and then there are hills. Like there's gold down there in the basement that needs to be retrieved and brought to light. That we'd be really, and we'll see this more as we get into the um some of the yin parts too, but the safety is really slowed down. Like we don't have to bite all of that off in one go and start having small wins and start having bite-sized morsels that we can actually digest in the present. Lots of experience because, as you were saying correctly, I think even if things originated in the past from a linear conceptual point of view, ancestral in the womb, early days in one's life, childhood, adolescence, whenever, adulthood, doesn't matter. The point in this work is that the reverberations and the echoes, as you said, because it's an incomplete trajectory or it's a movement that hasn't finished itself and it's caught in a loop, it's caught in the spin cycle, it's actually still present. So the ancient nervous system doesn't really have, as our more sort of neocortex does, it doesn't see the world. It doesn't think in terms of like past, present, and future. It just really exists in a kind of now space. So if something's incomplete, it doesn't matter from a chronological point of view if it was 25 years ago or 7 generations ago. Its echoes or reverberations are still happening in the present moment. So we don't have to go into some kind of regression. We don't have to go elsewhere. As you said, it's all present in the now. We need to be able to finish safely, and this is what all this container building or crucible building is for. Finish those unfinished emotions and sensations and memories. So they're done and they're complete, allowing us to actually live in the present and allowing the survival energies to be told, like, the war is actually over. And for that to actually matter means something.
Yeah, the inflamed parts of the nervous system that can inadvertently see an enemy where there is not one out of previous experiences that are still seeking resolution. And the nature of fear can be so overwhelming to experience that that wise action of noticing that there is an awareness of fear. Just even the awareness of fear allows for me in this process, me to kind of catch, hang on, don't move forward. There's fear in my body right now. Now is actually not a wise time to go into a deep contemplative process. My hands are shaking, my muscles are clenching, my breath is short and it's at the top of my lungs. When I'm able to attune to my body and read these responses of my nervous system and recognize where I am, I can respond to my nervous system and then move to feeling the information that's there, as opposed to this pattern which can kind of be like I need to move these feelings and I need to move this emotion, and so then we can distract ourselves from with anything, right? Exercise, shopping, sex, watching movies, all of these things that are attending to the nervous system on a layer that sort of keeps it not deeply softening into um, that safety that's there, looking for safety as a practice where we start to recognize that there is more safety here when we slow down enough and start recognizing where it is. And that's a big part of this program, is teaching us to notice when we're safe and to really allow that to permeate the body. Um, it creates a great intelligence in our ability to listen. And then that intelligence creates wisdom to choose better, to choose the right amount of this word that Chris and I love to use, titration. Like, how much can I digest if I'm working on this transmutation of these big sensations and I'm transmuting them in my belly? If I eat all of them, I'm just going to end up with an unhappy system. It's going to
Mhm.
just feel overwhelmed by it. So knowing how to attune to that element of the nervous system is a big part of this program, so that you can really start to come to know the validity of that information, but also how to work with it in a really sustainable way.
Yeah, absolutely. The There's the avoidance patterns you named that are kind of more the classical ones people would think of, the whatever it is, drinking or workaholism or, Netflix or whatever the case may be, um, as you named, or being in relationship trauma over and over again, or whatever the stuff on the news is that everybody's supposed to be upset about or whatever. Then we have like spiritual bypassing, the attempt to use meditation or various spiritual teachings in order not to have to feel our feelings or be human. And that's kind of one category of the avoidance side of the street. And then the other side of the street is people who do have a good commitment and are sincere and are not really trying to distract or avoid or bypass, but they can too quickly kind of like jump into the deep end before they really know how to swim. And that also, while it's, I could say, more sincerely intentioned, um, it's not particularly helpful that way either. And so a lot of the yang elements here of safety and listening for awareness and so on is actually really key to make sure we can actually learn to swim and we can be in the kiddie pool. That's actually okay and build up to eventually we don't have to start on the deep end if we don't know how to swim yet.
Chris and I like to talk about this as like digesting the shadow, but coming from resource, coming from the gift frequency to digest the shadow and to work with the shadow essences. The shadow essences are going to be there, we're in them. It's not like you need to go looking for them. Much of our life, we're in them. And it's really when we slow down to recognize that we're in them, then we get to kind of drive how do we want to be with them. But that space of being able to be resourced and to make that decision is it's a bit of a growth. It's a bit of a growth uh, practice to work with that. So
So are we
yeah.
ready to shift over to the yin
Mm,
side?
yeah. Yeah. Do you want to do like a little process
Hmm.
around the yang first and just kind of like
Yeah,
because
it's a good
the
idea.
the reason the invitation for this for me was this was a big growth for me. I didn't have a healthy ex I wasn't able to find until kind of latter parts of my life healthy expressions of husbandry or fathering or sort of these essences of like self masculine protection. Uh, and I love this word heart husbandry or husbandry because I got it from animal husbandry, which is like if I'm responsible for this vessel,
Hmm.
then how do I care for it in such a way that it has what it needs so that it can feel, like does it have warm feet? Is it
Hmm.
comfortable? All of these elements of sort of these check-ins. So yeah, let's have a
Hmm.
little experience of that for a moment. And then yes, I would love to move on.
Hmm. Well, thank you for the invitation. So one translation for yang is simply directive energy, and yin, by contrast, could be considered receptive energy. So it's a really interesting contemplation, I think, to have yang in this formulation, which is directive and agentic, be space holding, profound, the directive or agency of truly establishing container. So a very simple classic variation of that is just actually to take your hands, we'll rub together the hands and actually feel around you in the space close is actually feel your bubble. And if you're having trouble feeling it, then start to, if you're more visual, you can visualize it. If you're more kinesthetic, you can feel it. If you like to intend things, then just like make it so. Number two, like number one, like really, this is the classic, picture and classic energy things of the egg or the bubble or the aura or whatever you want to call it. This is our container. This is the field of our fundamental safety and potency and power in the world. And you might feel spots where it's stronger, and you might feel spots where it's a little weak, or there's holes or little gaps. And if you want to imagine it being very gold, since we're in the gold imagery, like have like a magic gold paintbrush It's like a caulking. And when you paint it, it thickens. And then if there's any little gaps or holes, you can fill them in. And that way you can start to feel that there's a dignity and a sovereignty and a power about your being. And inside that bubble, eventually, when it's strong enough, inside that crucible is going to be the space where some of the tender stuff is going to come up. And there's now a space, a magical third space. So we've got the bubble, then we've got kind of the skin and the sense of inside the body. Then we've got the bubble, the boundary. Then we have outside of that. But now we also have the space that's between the physical body and the bubble. And this space will be really key to be able to start taking some of the difficult emotions and sensations that are going to happen here and have not separation from them, but a healthy ability to have some differentiation and then be able to hold them so that we have the feelings and we have the sensations, not the feelings and the sensations have us. So the buildup of resource and the buildup of the container is so that we feel bigger than whatever it is that we're going to face,
Mm.
so that we can digest it, not it's digesting us. And overwhelm and then eventually numbing out and shutdown happens when we feel this big and the thing feels this big. In comparison, it feels like, big scary monster. But if we're this big and this thing's still the same size, in comparison now, it looks doable.
Yeah.
It still might be a bit of a spicy meatball for sure, but at least it can be now. Now there's choice and capacity to be able to digest it, one bite at a time.
Mhm. Thank you. That felt really good.
Mm,
Willingness, number 4. So as we develop this yang awareness and this containment and this spaciousness for the alchemy to happen, willingness, Chris and I have been riffing on this for a while because for a while this was like one of my spicy meatballs was like this yin being passive and I just need to be submissive and go
hmm
through life in this way where I can just smile
hmm
and that I knew that that wasn't accurate and that definitely wasn't what you were prescribing, but I couldn't find that
hmm
space in between where I was stuck on the sort of passivity of
hmm
yin. And then we had this conversation one day where the word willingness came up
hmm
and how willingness is not passive. Willingness is really that response to say yes over and over and over again. And one of the elements about my chart, which has been my biggest growth area, is that I have all of these 6 lines, but until you're in your 50s, your 6th lines are actually third lines. And so there's this theme of shame that is imbued within the third line and the way that it energetically shows up in the world. And if you don't know too much about your gene keys, don't worry about that. It's a theme of the wound for me as a felt sense can have shame really closely linked to it. And so radical approval is this balm for shame. And to turn towards that with a willingness to approve of everything that shows up in me. There's nothing passive about that practice at all, but it is alchemy at its most transformative in my experience. This was the linchpin on the other side of the containment. It was like, wow, how to turn towards that. So once I was able to have the spaciousness to turn towards it and be resourced enough to turn towards it, that next step was like this approval piece that was necessary because otherwise, like you said, it did show up as these big bad monsters of like, wow, that can't
Mm.
be me. I can't work with that.
Mm.
And so yeah, radical approval
Mm.
is this turning towards and loving the essence of, however it's displayed in the awakening experience, however those feelings come up that are seeking resolution still. They're here and they're seeking resolution and they're seeking me to approve of them. And the pattern, my codependent pattern that I'm still in process with, was looking for a masculine outside of me to approve of
Mm.
it. And so then going
Mhm.
into dynamics where I'm like, I'm looking for approval. I'm looking for approval. And it was like, why can I never feel approval in myself? And it was because it was like I had been working on this off of this pattern of seeking somebody else to provide the approval for myself. So that turning towards and creating that approval, even just the willingness to notice that I was
Mm.
seeking it outside of me, and then the willingness to turn towards it and say, could I potentially approve of this over time? Could I potentially create a space, and allowing uncertainty to be a part of that, allowing that uncertainty to be one of the ingredients in this next step?
Yeah. I love that you're emphasizing the word approval, the radical approval, and its relationship to willingness. And I also appreciate that you're really emphasizing that receptivity is not passivity. That yin is not passive. There's a deep yoga here. There's a deep alchemy of yin, and that's for everyone, whatever their gender, sexual orientation, biology. Like yin is a quality of the human incarnation of life. Actually, we can see yin everywhere when the land is fallow in the winter and the nitrogen is recycling in the soil. That's yin. When we go to sleep at night and our bodies regenerate themselves, that's yin. When you need a nice cat nap or you need to just soothe and lay on the ground and earth for a bit. These are all forms of yin. It's profoundly nourishing. It's also decomposers that are going to make the soil rich. These are all yin qualities of life. And it's very easy to overemphasize socially the yang as like productive and creating and expressing and growth and expansion. Um, and the yin can be forgotten as to if things are going to grow over time, as you were saying, sustainably, they need to be fundamentally nourished at their roots. That's true for all of us in our relationships, in our day-to-day life, and the breath. And so the cultivation of the yin, as we, are moving to this side of the model, like the cultivation of yin is cultivating nourishing capacity in our being. It's really cultivating like the soil to become nutrient dense, to become nitrogen rich, so that there can be a profound flowering and sort of harvest in our being of goodness. And it comes from deeply regenerative processes. And it requires first, because it is going to go into some decomposition and recomposition, and things are going to undo and become again. This is again to emphasize why the container comes first and then the willingness. The container is to build the crucible. The willingness is to say, now I'm going to put the lead in the crucible because the container is strong enough and I'm going to apply heat. That's the willingness. There's the choice there. And there is a receptivity in it insofar as like things are going to happen at their own pace at that point, and there's a process that's going to happen, and we're going to be done by the process as much as the process we do the process, as it were. That's the inside for sure. There's surrender in yin for sure. There's deep letting go. And I think the other point about the radical approval is that it's not from a sense that we're broken and needing fixing, as you said earlier, in the wholeness. It's a radical approval, even if it's a wound spot, even if it's an old part of us that we shut down, that's genuine of our being, that wants to come back alive, some spontaneous wisdom of our being, or innocence, or innate childlike creativity, spontaneity. We do it from a sense of feeling like we're whole and that this is a right and a good and a true thing to bring this wholeness into fuller expression. Not, okay, how can I do this alchemy process to make my pain go away? Or not have to deal with this the humanness of my being or make other people change or, so maybe the first round of avoidance is we want to fix others. But then we might find a second round of avoidance if we move through that one to say, like, we want to fix ourselves. And this approach is not to fix ourselves because we're not starting with an assumption of brokenness. So even while there's a transformational alchemical process that takes place, it's starting in wholeness, walking by wholeness, and undergoing transformation from wholeness. Not, I got to do all this stuff to get whole at the end.
There's a couple sort of, many people will recognize the yin and the yang as the symbol that both
Mm,
contain each other, the dark and the light. In the I Ching, the book that goes through, all of the changes of life, the book of changes, uh, I learned another definition, which is that there's one hill and there's the light side of the hill. It's called the yang side of the hill. And then there's the dark
mm,
side of the hill where the ferns grow and there's more wetness and it's cooler by nature. There's a coolness nature, or like you were saying with the seasons, the winter. And within that, there was this lesson about melancholy that I hadn't heard before, because in that theme of like fixing melancholy was a long theme for me of, oh, I'm down, or I
mm,
don't have much energy in this moment, and therefore there must be something wrong. And then to learn that melancholy is actually one of the feeling senses of yin in the body. One of the chemistries of yin in the body allowed me to turn towards and claim, oh, this is my yin experience. And that doesn't have um, sometimes the recognition, because we live in a very yang world, or we have for quite a while. We've come through a process of time where there's been this yang celebration. And yeah, and just finally this other way of looking at yang and yin, or yang and yin, that I really, it clicked for me, was that
mm,
yang can be this outward looking, and then yin can be this turn of inward looking. And so it's just, where is at any moment my attention going? And so if we look at it as like the yang is holding the gaze of protection for the yin to experience her feeling body. And that is a tremendous gift to offer ourselves, as well as to be able to develop the capacity to do this in a dynamic relationship outside of the sovereign experience as well.
mhm. And I really appreciate you naming the other side of the hill that's in the shadow that has the moisture and the ferns growing. And I think also, therefore, that connects for number five. I think that segues nicely for that side of the hill. The time rhythm is slower. Just as slower doesn't mean, again, people like fast is better, faster, more efficient. No, no, no. That's a shadow of the yang to the extreme without the yin. The gentleness and patience and the more slowed down rhythm so that the digestion can take place. If you're having one of those lovely, exquisite 10-course meals, you don't eat it in 20 minutes or you're gonna have a complete stomach ache. It's eaten over 6, 7 hours, right? And you get to enjoy and savor and relish. and have space for rests between and digestion and then another one and eat in small amounts and just like enjoy the entire process. Even when, yes, it's a spicy meatball, you might be digesting a little bit, even if it's has some intensities. What the alchemy does is releases the intensity back to life force and takes it out of the realm of suffering and shadow. And so, what might seem spicy, quote unquote, on the front end of the process actually turns, if it's done well and its completion or liberation and its alchemization, it turns into like vitality, joy, it turns into pleasure, creativity, possibility. But the yin for sure is always coming back to nurture and nourish the roots. And then whatever grows out of it is actually going to be organic growth. It's not going to be this, like doing the equivalent of ourselves of like a monocrop culturing and like heavy pesticides in order to like maximize the growth and then like strip the soil, of its nutrients. This way is like always come back to regenerate the soil, and then a regenerative soil is going to have beautiful growth that's going to be sustainable, that's going to be durable, that's going to be benevolent, and it's going to be the right amount in our lives.
I'm reminded of the animal husbandry again, and just these lessons of like chicks being born. And you get these. If you've ever had chickens and they lay eggs that are become chicks and they're fertilized. Um, it's so tempting when they start kind of pecking through in order to break out to help them, and just want to speed the process along, right? It's like, oh, this poor little tiny chicken, it's trying to emerge, and there's like this little beak that's trying to come through. Let me help it. And it's this really painful lesson to learn that it's very detrimental to the chick inside to speed that process along, to pull the shell off before it can fully separate, and
Mhm.
to under the idea of I'll make it easier for something to emerge. What's missed is this opportunity to develop our own tonus against the discomfort, against the outer gravity of the world, against the time. We're in a relationship with time, but time has an intelligence that is speaking to the matter body. Matter is yin. And so remembering that there is a process that is really intelligent within this that might not be easy to recall if we are not able to experience our own gentleness with self, our own patience with the process. And I spoke to the word in willingness, but it really kind of fits between the two of the four and the five, is that in the alchemical process, in this arc that's seeking resolution, in the middle segment of this chaos and creativity of this transformative, we're in the alchemical boiling still. There's a time in the middle where we don't know how long it boils and we don't know what's going to happen. And so uncertainty is this ingredient that is allowing for that success to happen, allowing for that intelligence to show us and reveal itself from that dark phase. And so a little yes and a little no is becoming attuned to the desire essence of the essence of our emanation, the essence of our soul emanation. That's that little chick that's trying to push its way out and develop itself within that, and to speed that along really um, can end that arc from happening fully. It could end the transformational arc from coming to completion, because it's like, well, I want it to happen so quick, and then it's great. We just get to start over again. It's not so bad. It's just it really gives us an invitation to like, well, we'll just start that process again in another pattern. We'll get to go through that pattern in a new way until it does fully get to go through um the end of it, that final kind of closure.
It's beautiful. And I
Yeah.
think it transitions perfectly to sensation number six. And as in the little chick, once it's out the egg, like the experience of the wind on the skin, or the newborn babe kind of feeling of the skin at first being a bit visceral. It's a bit raw when it's in direct contact with the elements. But it will calibrate, it will, in its time, not toughen up, but just calibrate and acclimate. And heat is applied, deep feeling comes out in the yin, the hardened lead form begins to melt down, and we go into a more flow liquefaction state. And then it's, as you said, there's this kind of spot between the old having kind of dissolved a bit or melted down. Now it's in this potentiality state. The heat is now really deepening, the boil's happening, and then there's still a moment before it clicks into a new, more coherent, um, more pristine form and frequency. And as it does, particularly as it begins to transform into the new variation that's going to be more elegant and coherent and integrated, it's just going to be a little raw. It's just going to be like, to get the sunburn and you get the peel and then the skin comes through and it's just a little tender. Um, but it will acclimate. And the acclimation process, which to me is what the sensation is really about, is acclimating to the fact that it's actually like way more beautiful to have feeling, deep feeling come back. Because all of the variations of whether it's the bypass or the avoidance or the dive into the deep end too fast, trying to fix ourselves, whatever, all the variations or and others like that, they're all variations of trying not to actually be with the feeling arc.
Yeah.
And instead, this process, alchemy is like actually learning to trust the arc of the transformative process of life, this organic intelligence and wisdom that you're speaking to. And when we start coming out the other end, you're right. First, there can be like an impulse, like, okay, I'm almost there. Like that last 10%, if I could just, and that's not going to help it. But also when we actually start to feel, wow, like this is a new feeling of what it is to actually have a lot of numbness come off and come back to things like boundaries or come back to things like my needs matter. I have needs. I'm human. I have joys. I have heartache. I have griefs. And this is part of what it is to be fully alive as a human being. I have melancholy. I have fears. But now we have a space to actually, as we were saying, like have them rather than avoid them or them have us.
It's not by accident that the 6 is the gold. This the opposite of sensation, and you named it, is numbness.
Yeah.
And numbness is not vitality. It's not open-heartedness. It's not deep love or passion. It's the absence of it. And the absence of it is actually calling for it. But without the containment and the patience and the
Mhm.
willingness, when sensation comes in, it can feel like it's the problem. It can feel
Yeah.
like it's the enemy. And so yeah, I from experience know that numbness can feel like a really lovely choice in this opposite. Maybe I would rather be numb actually than experience all of this. And it wasn't until I started exploring the theology behind Tantra, the ability
Mm.
to hold very, very uncomfortable or scary or sensations that resemble the sense of pain or it come towards overwhelm, but also the deep pleasure that can be held within that and the openness and the sensations of joy and effervescence of life and both being this is what ecstatic living is like to be willing to hold both of them as a human experience. So the melancholy and the exuberance can can both be there, and we can develop the capacity to feel both simultaneously and to not only go into the one river of one, but to open our awareness through this practice to more joy, more life. It's really coming into an experience of more life. And as you will start to see throughout this program, this is where humanity is returning to. This is what we're coming back to, is this like returning to life, returning to this um, capacity. I love this word, capacity, for sensation.
Mm. Hmm. Yeah. Tantra means weaving. So
Mm,
in this, like you were saying, they're weaving joy and heartbreak and sorrow and the sweetness and the bitter tastes of life all together. And the lead, if it's a survivalistic form, and the gold here representing more a gift or thriving frequency, survival logic dictates that we don't have time for meaning and purpose and creativity and emergence and mystery and awe and wonder and pleasure and senses of contentment and rest and fullness and patience and gentleness and you know falling down and going, oh, okay, I mean, that didn't work. Oh, let me think about that. And no, that's okay, we're all human. And and compassion, all of these qualities get put in the bin of in the trash bin, really, because the survival energies say we're under threat. All that matters right now is surviving. And anything that isn't immediately obviously oriented to surviving gets just chuck it out. And when in a survival mode, that's, as you said earlier, wisely, like the wisdom of a survival nervous system, it's great for being in an actual situation of an emergency or distress and having other functions temporarily shut off because we don't have time for that stuff and we got to just survive.
yep.
That's how it's supposed to be for, and then the threat's supposed to be over, and then that system is supposed to come offline. We're supposed to come down from DEFCON 5 now that the threat is past. But particularly for those who are raised in situations of chaotic dynamics, there isn't a clear marker that the situation has actually come down from the threat is not actually over. It's in a sporadic or ongoing kind of atmosphere. And therefore, the survival energies end up in a very vigilant default setting status. And even if we've entered into adulthood, and for folks who've gotten out of very difficult, say, upbringings, and now they've got, a more functional life, until this work is done to safely, unconsciously have the survival energies actually understand that it's actually safe to let go, they're still going to be unconsciously operating. And so then people do, I see all this all the time, where people are doing all this stuff. It's like, why can't I be more compassionate to myself? And I should be more creative, and I should do this, and I should do that. And it's just a big blame game. But the survival energies are locked in. They're not going to ever be oriented to deep creativity, profound empathy for self and other, the orientation to one's own needs in a healthy way. Like, that's not part of its logic. It's all power is being routed to the front shields. That's what's happening in a survival energy. And it's going to take all the power out of every other kind of quality that most people would associate with what's the point of living, is not just to survive, which obviously is profoundly more important than not surviving. Because there's plenty of people we can see who are, who have fallen through and haven't survived. So we can honor these survival energies, but they can't take us forward. They reach their liminal capacity. They reach their max, and their max is just going to be surviving. And, to me, it's like all those like zombie movies and shows. And they just like constantly like it's a never ending thing if they have to hold off the zombies and just survive. And I'm always like, what's the point? There's no living. They're not dying, quote unquote, but they become the zombies, right? Like to me, that's always the classic kind of thing in that kind of literature is like the humans, quote unquote, the non-zombies, have really just become the zombies. They just don't know it. And the survival energies do, when they become chronic and default, they are in this weird state that they're not a lot, they're not dead, but they're not alive. They're kind of undead. And the numbness is the most obvious feeling tone of that kind of zombified existence. And so coming back into feeling, as we're saying, is a package deal, as you were correctly pointing out. It's more joy, it's more compassion and heartache for the suffering of the world and people. It's more passion, it's more kind of righteousness and anger at the injustices. It's more humor, it's more lightheartedness, it's more awe and wonder, it's more pleasure. It's just, but as you're saying, in a regulated way, it's all the above.
I really love this practice. What it's brought to me is
Mm.
the felt sense of abundance within, as opposed to the
Mm.
chasing abundance
Yeah.
outside. And I had the fortune to have a big retreat center and multiple houses and successful
Mm.
businesses quite early on in my career, kind of my 30s, my mid 30s was this incredibly abundant experience that I couldn't feel. I couldn't
Mm.
experience it. I had so much outward awareness that it was always, the next thing, the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. And that just kept me outside. It just kept me looking in the outside world for the felt sense of abundance and never really being able to recognize it within me. And I shouldn't say never. I had moments of gratitude and sort of
Mm.
this like looking around where you're like, wow, wow, like I've just like
Mm.
checked all the boxes. Hey, really
Mm.
checked the boxes.
Mm.
Why am I not deeply feeling the meaning of this that I assumed it would bring? And it was because I hadn't been able to find it within. And now, in those moments, and they're not always there, I still have these waves, but what I find is the sensitivity that I've been able to develop as I come out of the numbness is a
Mm.
sensitivity to the small joys being these miraculous big joys, this like moment of hearing a child's laughter or a bird's
Mm.
trill can fill me up with so much sensation that I can't imagine anything taking its place with more joy. I can't imagine any
Mm.
material item holding that same level of ecstatic bounteousness for me. And so
Mm.
when it's within, then everywhere outwardly is experienced as abundant as well. And so, that good old the kingdom of heaven is within you. It's like,
Mhm.
man, these sages, they might have been onto something.
Right.
Yeah, thanks
Mm.
for that. That was a beautiful piece of the tantra. I'm sure you've told me that before about weaving, but I love the
Mm.
word weaving so much that it was so great that
Mm.
you brought that back in. So thank you. Yeah, anything else we want to bring together in this to kind of bring it into coherence and summary? Maybe a little yin experience.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe that would be our
Yeah.
nice. Do you want to do that or do you want me to do that?
I'm trying to feel for one right now as far as like I don't have a yin process that sort of pops to mind. Have you got something?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
so do that. And
Yeah.
thank you for hosting us and putting together this lovely slide and all the work that you've done to have it come through in your own articulation and your own process.
Yeah, thank you. Likewise. Thanks for collaborating and weaving it with me. It's been such a treasure just even to go through this and this experience. And yeah,
Hmm.
thank you.
So yin. So we had earlier the bubble and the feeling of one's own crucible or container, the cauldron of our alchemy. So it might be fun just for a moment to feel, go back to feeling the bubble first. So we feel that the container's there and strong. And then within that, just feel a little bit of the bubbling, the boiling, and how that will show up is a feeling that the Taoists called the inner smile. It's that energy that Sarah was just beautifully articulating of the laughter of a child and the song of the bird and the beautiful little dewdrops on the plants in the morning or the sunlight on the face. And just feel that like life has that smile. And since we are life, we too have that smile, or we are smiling. There is a part of us that's always smiling and feels blessed. Even if there's tenderness, even if there's hurts and all the things, it's not minimizing those, it's not bypassing them. It's just saying, let's start with home base. And then home base is really the feeling of a nurturing smile. Just 'cause. And you can come back to both the feeling of your container, and you can also come back to the feeling of the gentle smiling that's always there anytime. And it's a beautiful way to be with yourself. A nice big inhale, and then on the exhale, oh, shake it
Mm.
off.
Mm.
Thanks everyone for listening, if you've made it this far.
I feel a smile in my belly as you were speaking. I was
Oh,
like, I can feel this like smile in my belly.
oh, that's so sweet.
It's so sweet. Thank you.
Mm.
Yeah, amazing. So yeah, there's gonna be I'll maybe just stop sharing for those people that really love lots of information and are looking for more detail about this program. There's another video. I encourage you to check that one out. And for those that are more into the experiential process, just stay with this one and allow that to be still lingered in, marinated in for a time, and make that smiling belly home.
Mm.
Thanks, Chris.
So, bye everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks.